Chris O'Connor here. Join the Curmudgeon Rock Report's invite-only curmudgeonly community at facebook.com/curmudgeonrock. Also look out for a Spotify playlist that pays honor to this episode.
This is the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and this is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders. For those of you who lament that rock music has gone the way of jazz and slipped into niche genre status, we are here to keep that flame alive by providing insight, analysis, recommendations, and honest takes, not hot takes. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some rock history you never knew before. Late last year, Netflix released a documentary called Elton John, Never Too Late, a retrospective on the man's life, career, and its many high points. That, combined with John's recent retirement from live performance, makes this the perfect time for this podcast to tip its collective hat and give props to one of the most indelible, one of the most influential, one of the most impactful, and one of the most successful artists in the history of rock and popular music in general. From being a rather anonymous sideman and session musician in the late 1960s to performing at a sold-out Dodger Stadium wearing a Donald Duck costume, John's career has a narrative arc of highs, lows, and drama that most artists could only dream of happening to them. Rarely has unabashed flamboyance, stunning musical artistry and vision, and impeccable songcraft ever been tied together in such a potent package. But more importantly, the songs that John crafted with lyricist Bernie Taupin during his peak years in the 1970s are simply immortal. Their beauty, their catchiness, their rich melodicism, and sometimes even their epic scope have transcended generational appeal, and the best of them have become indispensable pop standards. Elton John has had a very long, eclectic, and prolific career, but it's the 9-album, 6-year window from 1970 through 75 that forms the bedrock of his legacy and will always define him. It's those albums and all those gorgeous, timelessly classic singles that they produced that we're going to dive deeply into and whose staggering brilliance we're going to ruminate on. So, welcome to the very best of Elton John's discography, to a discussion of the great man's legacy, and welcome to the Curmudgeon Rock Report.
All right, Arturo, episode 99 of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. 99. It's good stuff, isn't it?
If only we were as trippy and on the drugs the Beatles were in 1968.
Yeah, I was going to say we're just a couple of middle-aged men in suburban towns on both sides of the ocean, just doing our best to light the flame for rock and roll.
I don't live in the suburbs. I live right in the city.
You live in the city. I thought you were in a suburb in Korea.
No. Gwangju is a city. It's a proper city. I'm in the second downtown of the city.
Oh, okay. Basically. Well, how many people does Gwangju have?
1.2 million.
No shit.
Yeah,
that's a big town.
Yeah, it's a big city.
I was gonna say that's bigger than Buffalo. Yeah, I mean Houston. Hey, I still have you beat. The Houston area is 7 million. That's the greater Houston area. I live in a town. Yeah. My town only has 40,000 in it though, so I'm in a sleepy little suburb. What can I say? So anyway, folks, now to the stuff you care about. It's time, Marty. It's time to blast through the space-time continuum and go on. Yeah, yes. We're going to the parallel universe, everybody. The parallel universe. This is a better universe. It's a place where rock and roll is still predominant and is still king and still moves units. There's still such a thing as CDs and physical product, and artists still make money off their music. It's a glorious time over in the parallel universe. That's a way of saying that this is the segment of the show, folks, where we cover new and newish music by artists and also in their new albums that we think that you would dig and that you should check out, and that in a fair world would be huge. And I think I have to agree that in a fair and just universe, the album that Arturo is covering this week would be a monster hit. Now, wouldn't it, Arturo?
Absolutely. Hailing from Brighton, England, the political punk trio Lambrini Girls released their debut album earlier this month after a standalone single last year and an EP back in 23. And when I call them a political punk trio, I stress the word political because they come from a strong rock and roll tradition of leftist ideologues who aren't afraid to admit that the message is every bit as important as the music. It's a tradition that transcends rock subgenres and reaches back from System of a Down to Slater-Kinney to Rage Against the Machine to Fugazi to the Dead Kennedys to all the way back to The Clash. Last year, while they were on an American tour opening for Amyl and the Sniffers, Lambrini Girls delivered a scintillating performance at Seattle radio station KEXP, one that you can watch on YouTube, where during the interview segment, they proudly professed that their ferocious, abrasive punk sound was indeed a platform for their socio-political views. Gender identity politics, global politics, racial inequality, socioeconomic inequality, and economic policy guided by oligarchical fascism were all breathtakingly covered both in their set and in their interview. And these lyrical themes all dominate their superb debut album, Who Let the Dogs Out? No, not the 2000 song by the Baha Men. Not that one.
Although I'd love to hear that, though.
No, seriously, like for a certain generation of American, when you say the phrase, who let the dogs out, first thing you think of is, who let the dogs out? Wolf, wolf, wolf. No, this is not that. Although I wonder if this band ever heard of that song. I don't know. Anyway,
yeah, probably.
How to describe their music? For starters, the band they opened for last year, Amyl and the Sniffers, was both a compatible act and a starting point for description. Lambrini Girls don't have Amyl's penchant for dirty, sleazy barroom rock, but they definitely share their bolshy, hardcore punk energy, albeit spiked with a bit more of a post-punk, noisy fuzziness. Obviously way more political than Amyl's Amy Taylor, singer-guitarist and main songwriter Phoebe Lunny nevertheless also spews her socio-political commentary in a fierce, shouted word style that shakes the listener to the bone. Another fair comparison is another female UK punk trio we reviewed last year called the Baby Seals, whereas the latter could be described as righteous feminist punk with a mean grunge streak and a warped sense of humor. Lambrini Girls mostly eschew the grunge, but retain the hooky guitar riffs and indeed an in-your-face, cheeky sense of humor. The album roars off the gate with a series of turbocharged agate-prop, should-be punk classics such as Bad Apple, which condemns police over-aggression and brutality, Company Culture, which goes after sexual harassment in the workplace, Big Dick Energy, which is self-explanatory, No Homo, which needles the hidden homophobia of people who say they aren't homophobic, and the speed rush of Nothing Tastes as Good as It Feels. The second half, in my opinion, doesn't let up either, with badass rockers such as Filthy Rich Nepo Baby, key lyric, Hugo wants to be a rock star, his dad works for Sony, and the brilliantly titled Cuntology 101. The first month of 2025 isn't even finished yet, and we already have as strong a candidate as any for Best Album of the Year. All hail and bless Lambrini Girls, the right band for the right time. Chris?
These ladies indeed do make a hell of a noise. Big dick energy, big dick energy. It just really anthemic stuff, and there's a deep-throated screaminess to Phoebe Lunny's vocals that really make it engaging. And you can't beat a song title like Cuntology 101. It really is good stuff. I mean, me personally, I think the album wanes a little bit after the first three songs. The first three songs, which are Big Apple, Company Culture, and Big Dick Energy, are all fantastic and are all just intense and are all just bash the fuck out and all just really hooky. But from there, it wanes a little bit in terms of focus, in terms of engagement for me. I don't think until the very end with the songs "Love" and "Cantology 101," the songwriting kind of wanes too, and so it's all a hell of a noise, and it's all a really great album. I don't think it's consistent enough, and I do like the fact that it's one of my favorite wheelhouses these days. 11 songs and 29 and a half minutes. I do like the economy, but the beginning of the record and the end of the record dominate for me. The middle of the record, not so much.
All right. So what's your pick? What's your parallel universe album pick, Chris?
Okay. It's a rather more, it's a more charming, it's a more charming, more muted affair. There's no Cantology 101 on this album. I'm covering an album by a band called The Weather Station, which is really the project of a front woman named Tamara Lindemann, Toronto-based woman, and it's her band, and they've come into some prominence over here over the last few years, and they've just released an album, came out last week, called Humanhood, which I think is a pretty strong record considering the couple before it weren't so great. So let's talk about The Weather Station real quick here and Humanhood. They've been around for 15 years, but most of their acclaim has come here in the 2020s. The Toronto, Ontario-based folk rock band, I guess folk rock you could call them that, fronted by singer and chief songwriter Tamara Lindemann, gained critical praise for its first two records distributed by Fat Possum Records, 2021's Climate Change-Focused Ignorance and 2022's How Is It That I Should Look at the Stars. Each record was also nominated for Canada's Juno Award. Me personally, I thought those albums were kind of dull and samey and exactly what you'd expect from a band of this female singer-songwriter ilk nowadays. Not so with the Weather Station's strong new album, Humanhood, which was released earlier in January, basically last week on the 17th. The album is a consistently engaging, energetic, and eclectic affair, triple E, engaging, energetic, and eclectic, as it weaves flutes and strings in with more standard acoustic guitars, pianos, and keyboards. Lindemann also infuses some jazz stylings into her songwriting this time out, at times evoking singers like Norah Jones. Humanhood is compelling and richly textured in its exploration of its theme of feeling comfortable in one's own skin, and as a result, again, is a pretty powerful record, subtly powerful. Highlights include the lightly stomping yet melodic Window, and there's an emotive, tense ballad about a troubled soul in crisis called Body Moves. There's the rousing title track Humanhood, which features impressive sax soloing. And then there's the flute-spiked first single, Neon Signs, an up-tempo number about longing for trust in an increasingly synthetic world. 2025 is less than a month old, but already we're seeing here with the release of some very good records. We're talking about two of them in this segment. The Weather Station's Humanhood, with its ever-challenging soundscapes and moods, is an early favorite to end up on end-of-the-year critical top 10 lists. Think publications like Mojo. I can see them loving an album like this. Although not necessarily mine. We'll see. There's still a lot of music to hear, but I would say this is a good 3.5, 3 3/4 star record. And Tamara Lindemann is pretty engaging. I got to admit, she stepped it up, and I like this jazzy bent that she has now, where she's mixing up the instrumentation and the arrangements, and she's getting a little bit more personal. Like she's talked about climate change and things like that in the past, but on this record, she's talking really, it's like a visceral exploration of getting in touch with herself and feeling her feelings after a period of numbness is really where a lot of the songs are coming from. So pretty engaging stuff. Arturo, I'm guessing you tend not to like stuff like this too much, so I'm guessing you disagree with me.
Feeling her feelings. Give me a fucking break. All right. I can summarize my review of this album in 2 sentences. It's well produced, interestingly arranged, folk tinged alternative pop, but the songwriting is non-existent. There isn't a single memorable or distinctive verse, chorus, melody, hook, riff, or anything. That's it. A cool drum sound, cool saxophone sounds in the mix, a few slinky bass lines, and wishy-washy, new age sounding pianos don't make up for the lack of tunes. This is why I never listen to people who are primarily actors, which is what Tinderman is, she's an actress, and decide to make music. Actually, that should be our 5th curmudgeonly tenet. Actors make shit music. The end.
Yeah, honestly, I think Humanhood is pretty hooky. I think Neon Signs, which is the first single, I think it's probably the best song on the album. So, yeah, you're right. It's a singer-songwriter record, and it's more of sort of a jazz exploration. So it's more about the soundscapes than it is about the songs. That is a valid criticism. It's not the songiest record. It's a cool sounding experimental record, and I like that. And definitely she's come a long way. Those first couple of records that she did for Fat Possum, I told you, both were not that great, and were very samey. Whereas here, at least she's mixing it up, and so I'll give her that. And so you're right. I mean, are there some songs that lack a little bit in melody? Yes. But the songs that I mentioned, Humanhood, Neon Signs, Body Moves is another good song. I like the lyric on that too, just basically just really real angsty. And the song really kind of reflects that. So I'll give it up for Lindemann. I didn't realize she was an actress. But
yeah, that's her day job. That's primarily what she's known for. She's done a bunch of Canadian TV series and movies.
Yeah, and judging by the lyrics, which are the dramatism of the lyrics, maybe it shouldn't surprise me that she comes from the acting world or from a stage world. So what are you going to do? But no, I like her. I think she's good. I mean, I know that the 22 record showed up in a bunch of top tens. And some more to the indier side of things. It showed up on a number of top tens, and I didn't like that record when I was doing my explorations. When I was getting ready to do my 22 top 20 that we did that year, so she gets some love. She's a little bit of an it girl. I would expect that this album will get some publicity, and you can bet that the Sputnik Music's and maybe NME or publications like that, British publications, essentially. This will end up in a few top tens because it's just kind of up that alley these days.
Chris here again. We usually end our episodes by inviting you to join our Curmudgeonly community page on Facebook. Well, we're picking up our efforts there. Know people just as passionate as us about rock and roll? Invite them to join in the fun. You don't actually need our permission to do so. Also, expect to see a lot more content up there moving forward. Our mission is to engage you, so darn it, we'll engage you like a fire hose, or maybe like a firehouse if we're going to give love to Gene Simmons. We may also be making a few offers. Want to wear a t-shirt featuring our logo? You may have that opportunity soon. So be a fellow curmudgeon, help us expand our little community, and share your own musings via your own posts. We're at facebook.com/groups/curmudgeonrock.
Elton John, not a whole lot to add to the canon. We're going to do our best to serve up Elton John and to have a good, lively discussion of his influence and of these albums and of his music from the early 70s. He was an incredible ballad man and an incredible piano rocker. And but he also, he also is a kind of a personality. And I just wanted to start this off with I found an interview that he did with Cream magazine, and an interview with Jan Uhelski and Lester Bangs. Yes, the famous Lester Bangs, that he did in 1975. And I find this hilarious given what we know now about Elton. So Lester Bangs steps in and he says, after we had Wayne Robbins review Yellow Brick Road, and he said, he doesn't have sufficient heterosexual good looks, blah, blah, blah. We got this deluge of letters. The girls at Beaver College thinks he's sexy and peachy keen. They're absolutely serious. And Jan Uhelski says, how do you feel about being a sex symbol? And Elton John says, I can't understand it. I've always said that rock stars are supposed to be skinny and wasted. I think with me, with the female, it's very much a mother image. Oh, hey, can I cuddle you? It's a very subtle thing. In England, it isn't. I can't walk around the streets there for fear I'll get clothes ripped off. They're not subtle at all in England. They just go crazy. End quote. So this was back when Elton John was having sex symbol issues in his mid-70s height. I would say in 1975 he was probably at the peak of his powers when he said that. And so little did anybody know that he turned out to just be a chubby gay guy.
But an extremely talented chubby gay guy who wrote some of the best songs ever written alongside alongside Bernie Taupin, his great lyricists.
Yeah, absolutely. So Arturo, tell us about Elton John's origin story and about how he got started and how all this great music got set up to come to be and come to pass.
Elton John was born with the name Reginald Dwight in 1947 in the London suburb of Pinner, Middlesex, now known as Harrow. He was the only child of a pair of musically inclined parents, especially his father, who played trumpet in a semi-professional jazz band. Both Mr. and Mrs. Dwight had a large eclectic record collection, so young Reginald was exposed to a wide range of music from a young age, as well as all the popular singers and artists of the day. He began formal piano lessons at the age of 7, and at age 11, he won a junior scholarship to the Royal Academy of Music, being able to play back entire pieces of music after just hearing them for the first time, with Chopin and Bach being particular favorites. While he was 14, his parents divorced, but unlike a lot of other instances when kids have a tough time adjusting to their parents remarrying, Dwight had a very strong relationship with his stepfather, who his mother married just 1 year later. In fact, he lived in the same flat with his mom and stepdad for a little over a decade, up to the point when he had 4 albums simultaneously in the U.S. Billboard chart. In 1962, at age 15, Dwight got bitten by the rock and roll bug, or whatever you want to call it, and started playing piano in pubs around his hometown. When he played from his own personal taste reflected the wide-ranging scope of his parents' old record collection. Country music by Jim Reeves, R&B and soul by Ray Charles, rock and roll by Jerry Lee Lewis, etc., etc. Fun fact, Dwight actually had normal sight as a teenager, but chose to wear glasses so he could look like one of his heroes, Buddy Holly. Anyway, that same year, he and some friends formed a band called Bluesology, who quickly became a pretty hot band in the London club scene. By day, he worked for a music publishing company doing menial errands, and by night, he rocked the nights away in pursuit of that rock and roll dream. By the mid-1960s, Bluesology had become the opening act of choice for several American R&B and soul musicians coming to London, such as the Isley Brothers and Patti LaBelle and the Bluebells. In 1967, the legendary name change happened when Reginald Dwight adapted portions of the names of 2 Bluesology members, saxophonist Elton Dean and singer Long John Baldry, hence Elton John. And he eventually legally changed his name to Elton Hercules John.
Nice.
That same year, John answered an ad by independent label Liberty Records and the British weekly music newspaper New Musical Express, the NME. Liberty was looking for staff songwriters who could provide material for other artists to cover and to sing and perform. When John went in person, Liberty's A&R manager gave him an envelope of lyrics by a 17-year-old kid named Bernie Taupin. John promptly wrote music for the lyrics, sent the music to Taupin. Taupin liked it, they met in person, and from there they started a musical partnership that would eventually make history. Instead of Liberty, John and Taupin landed a staff song, or each of them as a team, landed a staff songwriting job at DJM Records in 1968, a label that was partnered with American record label MCA. They peddled easy listening pop songs to the likes of Lulu and Roger Cook. In 1969, they even submitted a song written for Lulu called I Can't Go On Living Without You as the UK entry for the Eurovision Song Contest. It didn't do very well, finishing 6th out of 6 songs. John and Taupin had had enough of the soft pop scene and were ready to not just write more challenging material, but to also strike out on their own as artists. DJM, the label, complied, and the John Taupin team produced songs for Elton John's debut album Empty Sky in 1969. It was a pleasant, if inauspicious, soul-tinged pop rock affair that didn't yield any hits. Nevertheless, the warm critical response encouraged the duo to keep going. The commercial floodgates would open in very short time. But before we get into that classic album run from 1970 to 75, Chris, your thoughts on Elton's origin story?
You know, it just floors me that Elton John and Bernie Taupin essentially hooked up through an ad in a paper. That Liberty Records is looking for songwriters, and they both answered that ad.
Yeah.
And so just to fill in a detail on the story, where they both, had made their submissions and were saying that's nice. And, John, was like, okay, here's music. Do you have any lyrics? And somebody there handed him an envelope and just said, here, you might want to look at these. And he didn't even know it was Bernie Taupin per se. Yeah. It was just an envelope that somebody handed him. He said, hey, can you give me some guidance here? And it just happened to do that. And it just happened that it was Bernie Taupin, and that's how they hooked up, through an envelope at a label that they each answered through an ad in a newspaper. And so, I mean, that just kind of floors me, and it just it shows that the power of classified ads back in the day. Yeah. I don't know if they still have that power here. I know there's Craigslist and things like that, but classified ads used to have a real power. Remember, several months back, we did an episode on Kiss, and Kiss found its members, or Gene Simmons and Paul Stanley found Peter Criss through an ad. Yeah. Right. In a newspaper. So yeah. So that's the part that just bores me. But beyond that, it just John, it doesn't surprise me that Buddy Holly was one of his heroes. Right. In the sense that you can say that Holly is one of the foremost melody meisters of the first golden age of rock there in the 50s. Right. And so I think that catching that melody bug and catching that ballad bug, because Holly is one of the foremost balladeers in rock history as well. Right. Yeah. Totally. So that doesn't surprise me at all. And just John comes from the tradition of sort of British, that early British rock and roll that combined R&B and music hall influences, but also with the Buddy Holly stuff and all of that. And so for him coming to there and then being in a band called Bluesology, that doesn't surprise me either. Yeah. So so that's it. John was a prodigious talent, and finding Bernie Taupin was just a stroke of luck, and led to the partnership of two true geniuses of their craft. So yeah. Good stuff.
All right, so here we go. We're not doing Elton John's entire career because he's had a million albums and has been around for many, many decades. But we're focusing on that 6-year run where he put out 9 albums and that cemented his legacy. When people think of Elton John, they think of these 9 albums and this 6-year period. This is Elton John. So we're starting with it. This is his second album, self-titled, from 1970, just like I said, self-titled, Elton John. This will forever be known as the album that has the timeless classic ballad, Your Song. You know, I hope you don't mind, I hope you don't mind. Yeah, you all know it. Elton's first major hit and a worldwide top 10 hit, and one of Brian Wilson's favorite songs, by the way. Yes, you all know the song. You just heard me sing the chorus. This may have been John's commercial breakthrough record, but artistically, it found John caught between 2 directions. One was the maudlin, cheesy, string arrangement-laden ballads of the kind he and Bernie Taupin had been peddling to other artists for the past couple of years. These are the worst tracks on the album. The other direction was the more inspired, bluesy, heavily gospel-inspired pop soul that made up the much better half of the album. This is most evident in the powerful Border song, which Aretha Franklin covered and got a top 10 hit out of, and the rocking Take Me to the Pilot. You also have No Shoestrings on Louise, where John is clearly trying to evoke the raunchy, swampy blues rock of late 1960s Rolling Stones. This is a classic 50-50 record, but the good 50% is superb, often stunning, and indicative of how well John assimilated his influences into something wholly unique unto him. Chris?
Yeah, there's a few things to say about this album. I mean, Your Song as the lead track, that the first album there, Empty Sky, it really it didn't do well commercially and really was kind of muted. So in terms of introducing yourself to the larger world, what a hell of a way to put your imprint on the world than having Your Song right there at the beginning of a record. Yeah. And which is like one of the more perfect love songs that's ever been on a record. So there you have it. And like you said, this album is weird. It's like there's a lot of overwrought, a lot of over orchestrated, a lot of just not necessarily cheesy, but just really out there and just overly dramatic stuff on this record that kind of stains it. But the good stuff is really good. Like Border Song is a fantastic song. Yeah. Holy Moses.
It's a gospel song, basically.
Yeah. I mean, it's totally a gospel song, and it makes sense that Aretha Franklin would have covered it. Turns out, I've read a couple of things that this album, they actually did this as a demo. It was supposed to be like a demo album so that they could submit for other artists. That at this point they were still, kind of caught between wanting to be a songwriting team for other artists and doing their own thing. And so, I guess it was originally submitted as here's the album to share with other artists. And the album was like, and I guess the label was like, fuck it, let's put it out. It's really, really good. Yeah. And so they did. And there you go. And, who wasn't all that enamored of this record, don't you?
Who did not like this record? Who could it have been?
It's our favorite rock critic, Robert Christgau, writing in his Consumer Guide in 1970. He writes about the album Elton John, quote, "A lot of people consider John a future superstar, and they might be right. I find this overweening, semi-classical ponderous, and a touch precious sensitivity on parade. It offers at least one great lyric about a newborn baby brother, several nice romantic ballads. I don't like its affected offhandedness, but Your Song is an instant standard, and a surprising complement of memorable tracks. But their general lack of focus, whether due to histrionic overload or sheer verbal laziness, is a persistent turnoff." End quote.
Well, in other words, he gave it a B. So basically he's saying it's half and half.
Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Which is what I said. Yeah. The good half is amazing.
Yeah, absolutely. And it definitely, kind of portended what was to come
Yeah.
for Elton. Again, how you can't start off your introduction to the world any better than having your song, which is over 1 billion plays on Spotify, by the way.
Yeah, 1 billion. Wow.
Yep, over 1 billion.
Right. Wow. Okay. Well, the next album on this run of classic albums, also 1970, Tumbleweed Connection. Lyricist Bernie Taupin has always been known for his love of American movie westerns and the overall mythos of the American Wild West. He really indulged in that love on this album, which isn't really a concept album in the sense that there isn't a central story tying it together. What it is, however, is a thematic album with every song's lyrics dealing with stories and characters in the American West of the 19th century. Musically, John takes the best part of the previous self-titled album, the bluesier, funkier gospel pop, and blows it up to widescreen cinematic proportions that this record requires. Burn Down the Mission is the most well-known track with its dreamy, hyper-melodic opening leading into a soaring anthem, a structure trope that would soon become a patented part of John's sound during the early 1970s. Amarina is another beautiful love song done in the style of Burn Down the Mission, while Ballad of a Well-Known Gun opens the album with some gritty, funky country rock. Country Comfort is probably the best gospel ballad about living in the countryside ever written by a gay middle-class white guy from England. John himself said, quote, lyrically and melodically, that's probably one of our most perfect albums. I don't think there's any song on there that doesn't melodically fit the lyric. And I could not agree more. Chris?
Yeah, I agree with that. This is definitely one of his strongest albums. And you can tell that Elton and Bernie were influenced by artists like the band and CSNY, who had been making albums for a couple years before this. And so, and it also fits in with the soft rock that was becoming big in 1970 as well. And so I think that those two things, you have that Americana Woodstock thing that's going on with the band and artists like that. And you've got the sort of the soft rock revolution, and Elton and Bernie fit right into that. I also like the songs Country Comfort and My Father's Gun. Those are really, really strong story songs. And it's kind of weird. You can't really call this a country western record. You can't really call it Americana. It's Elton John with a little bit of a twang. Just a little bit. And then, of course, the best song of the album is "Burn Down the Mission." That song is just tremendous and just hooky as all hell. And it's got that breakdown in the middle that comes out of nowhere with the piano vamp, which is just like, okay, we'll definitely take that. And one thing to mention, and this is sort of a theme that goes on with a lot of these records, that in the mid 90s, 95, 96, a lot of these issues were reissued for the CD era, and the reissues include bonus tracks.
Right. Some of them are great.
Yeah, and well, some of them were singles, were hit singles, and we'll get into that more later.
Yeah.
But the one of the two bonus tracks, I think it's two bonus tracks that shows up on the Tumbleweed Connection reissue is an early version of Madman Across the Water, which features on the next album of the same name. But this early version featured Mick Ronson of David Bowie fame on guitar, and so it's a little bit gnarlier than the famous version, the one that's in steady AOR rotation. So that's worth mentioning.
And also, the song Amarina was used in the opening credits in the Al Pacino classic movie Dog Day Afternoon. Remember that? Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. The next album, Madman Across the Water, like you said, Chris, from 1971. In 1971, especially in the UK, progressive rock was becoming all the rage. An emphasis on instrumental virtuosity and compositional complexity, multi-section songs that aspire to classical music form, the most complex chord progressions, the trickiest time signatures. In other words, unlistenable, impenetrable music for wankers. This was the terrain of bands such as Yes, Genesis, Gong, Vandergraaf Generator, and Emerson, Lake and Palmer, with King Crimson being a moderate exception and Jethro Tull being acceptable only in small doses. So, when Elton John decided to tackle prog rock in his own inimitable way, it's a testament to his talent, his vision, and more importantly, his taste, that he imbued his version of prog rock with a warmth, a melodic grace, an emotional heft, and, thanks to Bernie Taupin, a lyrical beauty and resonance that put most prog rock bands to shame. 2 words: Tiny Dancer. This Curmudgeon's pick for the most powerful, beautiful power ballad of all time.
Yeah.
1 word: Leave On. A deeply moving, tear-jerking epic of monolithic orchestral proportions that just may be the greatest song about Jesus ever written by a gay atheist. And with the title track, conductor Paul Buckmaster's string arrangements, which take the previously syrupy, meandering strings of John's self-titled debut and inject them with a pointed directness, are the shining lights for a rather complex piece with a wonderfully elastic bass line and possessing of various rhythm shifts that never alienate the listener. You want to call Madman Across the Water prog rock? Fine. In that case, it's one of the 5 greatest prog rock albums of all time. Chris?
Yeah, basically, if you got rid of the last 2 songs, All the Nasties and Goodbye, this album would be perfect.
Yeah.
I love this album. Tiny Dancer, I agree with you, is right there, and I can't hear Tiny Dancer without thinking of that scene in Almost Famous.
Sure.
When they're all on the bus, which is just incredibly moving. Just even thinking about it moves me. But and then like imagine starting. He starts an album with Tiny Dancer and Leave On.
Yeah.
Nowhere. You would think there'd be nowhere to go but down after that. But he maintains it. I mean, there's some really, really strong songs on there. Madman Across the Water is a hell of a song. And you're right about the string arrangements on here.
They're more tasteful. They're
more tasteful and they're better. They're punchier. And I would say they're probably the best string arrangements on any of John's records. Is on this album. But he has a streak in there, like Indian Sunset is another great song, and that's a high point for Bernie Taupin, which is it's a survival ballad about a Native American, out in the woods, just figuring things out, and it's a little bit historically inaccurate. It makes a reference to Geronimo getting shot to death, whereas Geronimo actually died of pneumonia in his late 70s. So Geronimo was not shot, folks. Just remember that. But just the vivid historical imagery and just the beauty of the language of the words of that song. I mean, Taupin really he was a true poet. He wasn't just a lyricist. So it really goes well from there. Holiday Inn is another great song too. It's mandolin spiked song. Good stuff. And so it's just really, like you said, it's proggy, but it all works, and it's melodic and it's beautiful, and it's an event type of album. If you get rid of All the Nasties and Goodbye, we'd be talking about a perfect album. And that's another thing worth mentioning, by the way. Elton, this was back in like 69, 70, 71. You were hard pressed to find anybody that was making albums that were longer than 35 minutes.
Yeah.
Like most of the great albums in that period are like 10 songs and like between 34 and 37 minutes. Yeah. Elton's shortest album, I believe, was like 42 minutes during this period. So he made unusually long albums.
Yeah. And he made a lot of them. He was super prolific too.
Yeah. And he made a lot of them. And he was the master of the ultimately listenable and never endingly non-boring 5.5 minute pop song.
Yeah.
Ballads.
He was the king of the ballads.
The rule book says you're supposed to do 3-minute pop songs. He did 5.5 and 6-minute pop songs and these ballads routinely. And he knocked him out of the park routinely as well.
And we all have Bob Dylan to thank for that, because he's the one who broke that rule in 1965 with Like a Rolling Stone.
Yeah, pretty much. Absolutely. So thank you, Bob. that in some ways, without Dylan, you don't get Elton John. Elton John might not have the freedom, or Bernie Taupin certainly wouldn't have the freedom to do what they were doing in a rock and roll sort of pop construct.
Right. Sure. All right, the next album, Honky Chateau from 1972. For all of Madman Across the Water's virtues as a great album, it was not a huge commercial hit for Elton John, especially in the UK, even with Tiny Dancer and Leave On becoming instant standards on album-oriented rock radio. John was never one to be shy about his commercial ambition, and he craved that super-duper worldwide smash album. Enter Honky Chateau, the record where Elton John became Elton John in big capital letters. It wasn't just in his onstage appearance where he started to dress in campier, more flamboyant outfits. The album as a whole, in its sound, showed off the shiny, glittery sheen of the glam rock movement that was so popular at the time, especially with the dreamy, swooning space rock of Rocket Man, a song that had more than a passing resemblance in mood and sound to David Bowie's Space Oddity. The song became a worldwide top 10 hit, an instant 20th century classic, and to this day, one of John's 2 or 3 signature songs. The other major hit was Honky Cat, perhaps the campiest a New Orleans style boogie woogie song ever put to tape. And of course, there's my pick for the greatest Elton John song of all, the impossibly gorgeous ballad Mona Lisa's and Mad Hatter's, lyricist Bernie Taupin's ambivalent ode to New York City, with the lyrics inspired by Benny King's Spanish Harlem. That's on a micro level. On a macro level, it's a plea for class consciousness, the plight of the poor and the downtrodden, and a commentary on how clueless the rich are to the suffering of anyone who isn't rich. And then there's the, yes, again, campy and very tongue-in-cheek, I think I'm going to kill myself. The Dr. John on steroids funk of both Susie and Amy, and the glam doo-wop of Hercules. It's a fantastic record, and the one that put John in the heavyweight division of rock stars. Chris?
Yeah, to me, this is his best album.
Really?
I would put this ahead of one of the records we're going to talk about here soon. I would put it ahead of Tumbleweed Connection. There's something about this record that really works for me. I think that his embrace of the New Orleans artists, you know, the Alain Toussaint's and Dr. John's and sort of
Fats Domino.
Yeah, and Fats Domino with Honky Cat, and I think I'm going to kill myself. And I think I'm going to kill myself as a just hilarious song, because it's basically a parody of moody teenagers.
Yeah.
And just sort of talking about like the most maudlin thing you can think about in the most happy peppy tune.
Yeah.
And it also features tap dancing in the instrumental bridges, which is kind of an odd touch. But Mona Lisa and Mad Hatter's wonderful song. You know, a rose garden doesn't grow in New York City. The sentiment, like you said, is sending up Benny King's Spanish Harlem is just tremendous. And I don't know, there's just here's the difference. I think one of the things about this album is that as Elton was getting more popular and was getting more established with his label, he was getting a little bit more power. His producers and label, they wouldn't let his backing band, his live band, play on more than one track on any of the first 3 or 4 albums.
Wow.
This band that he had been working with since 1970 on the road. Well, here they finally get a chance to play on the album. And so the production is a lot less precious than it had been. And it's a lot earthier, and it's a lot groovier. And it turns out they're a really good band.
They're a great band.
They were a great band. And
watch live clips of them on YouTube. Terrific.
Like the guitarist, Davy Johnstone, is fantastic. For sure. So having them on the record makes this more of a collaborative affair, more of an earthy affair, and in some ways more folkier than he had done previous to that. So I really am a huge fan of this album, and It actually it's number 251 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest albums ever made. And so that's about right in terms of all time albums. I think it really kind of belongs there, if only for Rocket Man. Like having Rocket Man and Mona Lisa and Mad Hatters on the same record.
Yeah,
It doesn't matter what else is on it. It's a great record because those are two of the best singles of all time.
Totally.
Yeah.
Now, I actually no. Mona Lisa's and Mad Hatters was not a single. It became a big hit on album-oriented rock radio, AOR radio.
But it wasn't a formal single.
Honky Cat.
Honky Cat obviously was a big hit. Yeah. But I just assumed because Mona Lisa and Mad Hatters is such a staple of AOR.
It gets played all the time. But
on classic rock radio.
It's not. I know.
I would have assumed it was more commercially put out there than it was.
It's your classic album track is what it is.
There you go. Yeah, it's a king of the album tracks.
Well, I don't Stairway to Heaven. I don't know, man.
Well, yeah. Okay. I actually just heard Stairway to Heaven on my local classic rock radio. So you have a point, sir. You have a point.
The next album on this wonderful streak, Don't Shoot Me, I'm Only the Piano Player from 1973. Elton John was riding high in the middle of one of the greatest hot streaks in rock or pop music history when this album dropped in early 73, and it continued his run of massive hits as one of the most underrated albums in his catalog. Chris's all-time favorite Elton song, Crocodile Rock, is on this one, and it was another huge worldwide top 10 hit. Around this time, there was pop culture nostalgia for the 1950s, and John delivered 1950s style rock and roll with a glam rock tinge and some endearing campy cheesiness, especially with the vocal hook. La, 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 la. You all know that song.
Yep.
Another huge top 10 hit was the breezy, flowing, immaculately arranged piece of pop perfection that is Daniel. My fourth favorite Elton John song, with Bernie Taupin speaking in the second person about a Vietnam veteran who leaves once he comes back to the States because he can't deal with his civilian life after all the strife that he suffered in Vietnam, and is told from the perspective of the Vietnam vet's younger brother. You wouldn't know that from listening to the song, but if you listen to interview or read interviews with Bernie Taupin, he explains the lyrics to the song, and then you listen to the song again, and it kind of makes sense. Like all of John's albums during this time, they were far from singles platforms. Midnight Creeper rocks with a serious funk and has one of, if not the best guitar solos on any Elton John song. During this time, no one, and I mean no one, did ballads like John did. An album closer, High Flying Bird, goes straight for the heartstrings with a soaring, irresistible melody and emotional lyrics that avoid triteness. A terrific album. Chris?
Yeah, terrific album. And Crocodile Rock is definitely my favorite Elton song. It's so much fun. And it's a great send up of Bobby V and some of those pop singers, like the Mitch Ryder, some of those folks from the late 50s, early 60s. And it's just a really great send up of those and just so infectious. I mean, and so hooky, and like you said, you every time that song comes on the radio, I have to sing, la, 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 la. Yeah, it's good stuff. And the one interesting thing about this song is there's only 2 songs with string arrangements on it, and so it's more guitar oriented than a lot of his other records. And that's the thing about it is his albums during this streak, they were all really balanced. They all maintained a stylistic diversity throughout it. They all have the power ballads, they all have rockers, and they all throw curveballs, where, you get into some sort of stylistic, stuff that you wouldn't expect. Like, I think that on this one, the 2 songs in terms of curveballs that stand out are Have Mercy on the Criminal, which is a kind of bluesy, sensuous character study and kind of a dramatic orchestrated piece about a criminal on the run, about an escaped convict, and really kind of engaging theatricality, not campy. It's a non-campy theatrical song. And then there's the really, really funny amusingly sarcastic Texan love song, which now that I've been in Texas for 7.5 years is almost insulting. Because Elton does it with a fake Texas accent and really really goofs on Texas tropes on that. And he's also on that same front. He's got a song on there called "Teacher, I Need You," which is a classic take on the teacher's pet concept. So again, there's this album goes all over the place. I said it's weird because the two most orthodox ballads on it are the bookends to the record. There's Daniel, which opens the record, and High Flying Bird that closes it.
Right.
But in between, it's one of his most eclectic and one of his most diverse albums, and just really, really kind of a special record as well, and underrated. I would say underrated overall. It's not quite as good as Honky Chateau. It's not quite as good as the next record, but it's pretty damn good.
On this episode, we discuss the genius of Elton John during his peak years. For the next episode, we're going to bring you the 5th and final chapter of our hip-hop history series. This episode will focus on the first decade of the 21st century, known as the noughties or the aughts to some. By this time, hip-hop had essentially replaced rock as where the cutting edge of popular music could be found, and the music itself was starting to quickly mutate and change, even by its own super fast standards. If the DJs of the past became the producers of the present, this was the time and the era of the producer as auteur, with the likes of Timbaland, the Neptunes, and Kanye West coming to prominence, the latter eventually breaking off and becoming one of hip-hop's all-time biggest superstars. The decade also saw the Dirty South scene, mostly from Atlanta, become the center of the hip-hop universe, with Outkast becoming a pop crossover sensation, as well as the rise of the likes of Ludacris and CeeLo Green. And of course, there's the historical and cultural importance of Eminem, hip-hop's first authentic white rapper, and arguably the genre's biggest ever star. Join us next time as the Curmudgeon Rock Report brings you Real Hip Hop's Last Stand, 1999 through 2008. All right, the next one is my pick for the best Elton John album, Goodbye Yellow Brick Road from 1973. When artists and bands feel they're at the peak of their powers, especially so in the 1960s and 70s, they've always felt the need to put out double albums. As I've exhaustively maintained on this podcast over and over again, the notion that double albums are usually bloated, indulgent affairs that should be trimmed to single albums is one of the biggest bullshit myths in all of music. Rather the opposite, especially if you do an inventory of music history, especially in rock. Double albums are quite often among an artist's best work, if not their best work, period. This album is no exception for Elton John, and in fact is the best album of his career, in my opinion. Some of the greatest singles and radio songs of John's career are here. The epic symphonic rock opener, Funeral for a Child / Love Lies Bleeding, the gorgeous Marilyn Monroe tribute ballad, Candle in the Wind, the heavy R&B stomp of Benny and the Jets, the starry-eyed, dreamy glam rock ballad that is the title track, another worldwide top 10 hit, the crunching, raging Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting, the most balls-to-the-wall rocker John ever wrote, and the elegiac album closer, Harmony. The famous songs alone don't make this John's best record. You have the delectable pop reggae of Jamaica Jerk Off, the Todd Rundgren-esque power pop of Grey Seal, more boogie-woogie rockers like All the Young Girls Love Alice and Your Sister Can't Twist, the swaying country number Roy Rogers. It's a perfect double album, something that many artists in music history cannot claim that they have. Chris?
Yeah, well, I'll say up front that this album takes a hit for me because of Candle in the Wind. I can't stand that song. And part of it is because... It
got overplayed. It got played out after Princess Diana died.
Yeah, well, it got played out twice. So that he released a live version of it as a single in the mid-'80s. and which it charted at that point and was all over the place. And then it got played out when he redid it as a Princess Diana tribute in 1997, which, by the way, was his first number one song in 97. That was his first number one song since 1975. And it was you couldn't avoid it, and so so it there's a little bit of a demerit there, but other than that, tremendous album. There's a lot of good songs on this. Like personally, I think "Funeral for a Friend," by the way, not "Child," "Funeral for a Friend."
Oh, sorry, "Funeral for a Friend." Sorry, yes.
"Love Lies Bleeding." That is probably my favorite Elton John track, guitar solo or guitar riff.
Have you ever heard Metallica's version?
No, but I'm sure it's fantastic.
It's really good,
and I'm sure it fits that band perfectly.
Yeah,
because it's the beginning part with "Funeral for a Friend," which kind of sounds like Italian porno music. Has that kind of like organ thing going on. And then it builds into "Love Lies Bleeding," so that's terrific. "Gray Seal" is a terrific song. Originally, they recorded that originally, or that shows up as one of the bonus tracks for the first album, Elton John, and they re-recorded it here to better effect. Right. "Dirty Little Girl" is awesome. "All the Girls Love Alice" just rocks. Yeah. And then the second half of the album actually is, with the exception of harmony, all of that is just like completely just rocking, it just everything on it. It's just the most intense streak on any Elton John song, especially, "Saturday Night," which, is just, completely anthemic and will never die on even standard classic rock radio. Like, let's just put it this way. Even on classic rock radio stations that play like Bad Company's "Shooting Star" every other hour, play "Saturday Night." Even the ones that play Clapton's "After Midnight" over and over and over again, they all play "Saturday Night." So that's how indelible that song is. And so it'll never, ever, ever die. And let me just read into the record from Rolling Stone's 500 Greatest Albums write-up. It comes in at number 112.
I think that's a little too low. I would put up a little higher than that. Even.
Yeah, I might. Honestly, again, I think Honky Chateau is a better record. But in terms of influence, I can see why this album is high, because it's an incredibly influential record. But this is what Rolling Stone wrote about the album for its write-up. It says, quote, "Elton John compared this double album to the Beatles' White Album, and why not? He was by this point the most consistent hitmaker since the Fab Four, and soon enough he would be recording with John Lennon. Everything about Goodbye Yellow Brick Road was supersonically huge. From the Wagnerian opera-like combo of Funeral for a Friend and Love Lies Bleeding to the electric boots and mohair suit of Benny and the Jets. Saturday Night's All Right for Fighting was strutting rock and roll. Candle in the Wind paid tribute to Marilyn Monroe and later Princess Diana. And the title track harnessed the fantastical imagery of glam to a Gershwin sweet melody," which is pretty much true. That the melody, the chorus to "Goodbye Yellow Brick Road" is as sing-songy as it gets.
Totally.
Another good song. So can't a lot of good things to say about it, but if it didn't have fucking "Candle in the Wind," it might actually be perfect.
I still love that song because I ignore all the Princess Di stuff. I just
I don't know. That's my own cultural prejudice at work. What can I say?
All right, the next one, Caribou from 1974. This is the album where the quality of John's output starts to get a little inconsistent. He starts to recycle himself a bit with the usual styles and forms he had been delivering or delving in for a while, but without adding anything new to the mix. But this being Elton John in the 1970s, it was still a huge commercial success with a couple of incredible singles. The Bitch Is Back is as raunchy as it is hooky, as it is rocking, with some terrific crunching rhythm guitars guiding the mix. Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me is another swelling, soaring, hyper-melodic John ballad that goes down as easy as honey. But when it's crafted this expertly and this perfectly, who's complaining? Both were massive worldwide top 10 hits. Chris?
Yeah, this album is just the worst of the 9 that we're covering, I think, by far. I think that, part of it was that they they only had a short amount of time to make the record because they had to go out on a tour in Japan. Right. And so there was pressure from the label from them to produce it. They only had like 9 days or something to turn it around, according to a couple of things I've read. And so that might explain why a lot of it is it's just a lot of it is corny, a lot of it's cheesy, a lot of it's lightweight. Like Solar Prestige Gammon is just terrible.
A lot of throwaway songs. You can tell, like, scraping the bottom of the barrel here.
Dixie Lily is just corny as hell. Stinker is well named, and it's so bad. Even the guy who produced it, Gus Dudgeon. Gus Dudgeon produced all these records that we're talking about. He was Elton's producer up until 1976. But Gus Dudgeon talks about it, and I got this from the Wikipedia write-up. And sometimes Wikipedia is, it's a good meta source. And Gus Dudgeon says, this album's a piece of crap. The sound is the worst. The songs are nowhere. The sleeve came out wrong. The lyrics weren't that good. The singing wasn't all there. The playing wasn't great. And the production is just plain lousy. Gee, tell us how you really think. What you really think there, Gus. I will say this: the one saving grace outside of the two singles is that Grimsby is a good song. I like that. That's a good swinging little rocker that makes the album. And I will say this about "Don't Let the Sun Go on Me." That turned out to be kind of a template for a lot of what he did in the second half of his career. Yeah, that sort of white boy, kind of blue-eyed soul. Type of song, like
kind of a precursor to the Lion King shit he did.
Yeah, and the only time he came close to being this good at doing it was when he did. I guess that's why they call it the blues in 1983. Yeah, but none of the other later stuff even came close to "Don't Let the Sun Go Down on Me." This is by far his as far as the blue-eyed soul stuff he was doing. This takes the cake.
Yeah, he did this song with George Michael at the Freddie Mercury a tribute concert after Freddie Mercury died.
Yeah, and they actually the two of them they scored a hit together. I don't think it was. I don't know if it was at the Freddie concert that they did it. They did a live version of it that was released as a single and actually became a modest hit and got.
I think that was the one. I think it was. Oh no, no. Maybe it was another one.
Yeah, it wasn't the Freddie concert, but but they did a live version. That they got a video of it on MTV that was in heavy rotation through like 1990. Right. So, and like you said, with George Michael, the good looking gay guy, not the chubby gay guy.
All right. Next, Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. Yeah, the Brown Dirt Cowboy. This is an autobiographical concept album about the early careers and eventual rise of both Elton John and his chief lyricist, Bernie Taupin. It was also a huge commercial success, but at this point in his career, John could have recorded the sounds of his farts and they would have all gone to number one. Here's the thing, though. This album isn't very good. The general rot of repetitiveness and increasingly stale songwriting grew on this record, but there is one glowing exception, and that's the big hit off the record, the haunting, shimmering, searingly emotional ballad, Someone Saved My Life Tonight. It's based on John's real-life depression that he was going through at the time due to drug and alcohol addiction, as well as the ever-present pressures of fame. It's the one highlight on a mostly drab album. Chris?
Yeah, I don't think it's that drab, actually. I think what it is it's the least pop-conscious record they did since Tumbleweed Connection, and it's more song-conscious. And so they were, and because of the autobiographical nature of it and the more personal nature of it, I think that they were looking to do the songs, and they were not out to write hits with Captain Fantastic and the Brown Dirt Cowboy. They were this actually is a true concept record, not like Tumbleweed Connection is a loose, very loose concept record. This is an actual concept record that tells a story about these two being down and out before they made it together. And you're right, Someone Saved My Life Tonight is really, really good, and is definitely the highlight of the album. But there's some other good stuff on it. I like a lot of it. I think that it gets the only complaint I have is like at the end of the record, there's like 3 or 4 songs in a row that essentially have like the same melody. And so it's not.
That's the reason why I don't like this album. It's like the same song over and over again.
Yeah, it does lack in some diversity, and so, but it makes up for the lack of diversity in spades with poignancy. It might be the most poignant of the Elton albums. So one thing to note that the reissue had Philadelphia Freedom on it, which is one of his best songs. It's a single that that him and Taupin wrote in honor of Billie Jean King, who was a good friend of Elton John's. And so the song's about her, but it became a big hit, and it comes out of these sessions, and it was tacked on when they did the reissue in 1995. So there you go, Captain Fantastic. Arturo doesn't like it. I really like it. I think it's definitely, again, it's a throwback to. It's not as rocking as the stuff before it had been, but it's a throwback to sort of the earlier catalog. Probably Tumbleweed Connection is the closest.
Tumbleweed Connection is way better than this, though.
Oh yeah, and some. I think it is better, but this is it's a close corollary. I like this album.
Yeah. All right, the next one is one we both agree on. Rock of the Westies from 1975 as well. This is the last album. The last album in this streak of albums that we're celebrating on this episode is Elton John's last gasp of greatness before the bottom fell out, creatively speaking, and he spent the rest of his career coasting on his rock stardom. The reason this album is so good is that it has an energy, a spark, a vitality that was sorely missing in the previous two, as well as a clean, focused, unmuddied production. Perhaps this has to do with the fact that John shook up the lineup in his band, replacing both the longtime drummer and the bassist, a testament to the notion that a band changes entirely once you change the rhythm section. Oddly enough, the single and the big hit from the record, Island Girl, hasn't aged well at all with its campy corniness that wouldn't sound out of place on an episode of Love Boat or Fantasy Island, two corny-ass, supernatural tinged TV dramas of the time. The track John wanted as a lead single, Dan Dare, is way better, with its groovy, southern fried New Orleans funk and talk box aided lead guitar work, popularized earlier this year by Aerosmith's Sweet Emotion. While not particularly funky, Grow Some Funk of Your Own, nevertheless, and The Raging Hard Luck Story are gritty rockers that manage to have just arena-ready choruses. Of course, with Bernie Taupin providing the lyrics, a ballad inspired by American Old West tropes is Never Far Away, with the last good one of its kind in John's discography with I Feel Like a Bullet in the Gun of Robert Ford. Probably the best track is the album opener medley, Yell Help, Wednesday, Ugly, those 3 tracks in a row, with its driving funk rock slowly progressing into a high throttle disco groove. Fantastic. And you know who else loved this record, Chris?
Who's that?
Our favorite music critic, Robert Christgau.
Oh, him again?
Him again. Here's what he said about this record. Quote, "First time I read the lyrics, I got angry. But not at the lyrics, which are Bernie's best. I thought the new band's machine-tooled hard rock and Elton's automatic good cheer was negating their toughness and clarity and complexity. But I was wrong. Intentionally or not, the marimba accents of Grow Some Funk of Your Own and the faked-up Caribbean inflections of Island Girl elaborate the song's racial ironies, while the band's fiery temper on Street Kids and Hard Luck Story cuts through John's arbitrary ebullience. Now, if only Bernie furnished every song with a perfect out like this one from I Feel Like a Bullet. You know I can't think straight no more. A-.
Yeah. Thank you, Bob. And that's actually a pretty good take. This obviously this has had his most rocking stuff since the second half of Goodbye Yellow Brick Road.
Yeah.
I love Grow Some Funk of Your Own. I love Street Kids, and I'm a big fan of Billy Bones and the Whitebird at the end of the album, which it's Elton John rocking a Bo Diddley beat Who knew?
Yeah.
Neat feat. There's that. So this is obviously they dropped their pop consciousness for Captain Fantastic. Well, they got it back for this album.
Yeah.
And you're right. Island Girl is forgotten. I hadn't heard that song in years and
Yeah.
years and years. And that was a number one song.
I know.
That was his last number one song until Candle in the Wind in 1997.
Yeah, the other version.
Yeah, and actually, you mentioned that this is he kind of fell off a cliff after this. That he stopped working with Gus Dungeon.
Yeah.
After 1976. He also stopped working with Bernie Taupin full time for 7 years after
he
1976.
he got other lyricists.
And he started working with other lyricists, and he didn't even have a hit. I mean, basically, Island Girl was his last hit until like 1983, where he had a something of a comeback with the songs "I'm Still Standing," and I guess that's why they call it the blues.
Right.
And then the next year in 1984, he had "Sad Song Say So Much."
Right.
So he had those songs, but he didn't have a hit for 8 years.
Yeah.
And so this was kind of him shooting his last shot, literally, for a while before he kind of went into a forced mediocrity. It's probably around this time that he bottomed out as an addict and got sober. And that's another tenet of this show. When an artist gets sober, that's it for that artist.
See Aerosmith.
Yeah. Yeah. See, especially Aerosmith. But Elton John is the next thing. And it's weird. Elton John didn't make a comeback. The biggest thing he was ever involved in commercially and the most successful thing he was ever involved in was The Lion King, which was 1994.
Yeah.
And, he got a top.
Can you feel the love tonight?
Yep. Got a number 5. Yeah. That song went to number 4 in the US. And, obviously, the movie is a huge success. He won an Oscar for that song, and it's been on Broadway for 20-something years, and it's never going to be off Broadway. I actually saw that show here in Houston last year. It's pretty good. It's an entertaining show. But yeah, Elton, if he was going to go out, he went out pretty well, and he went out rocking.
Yeah,
Rock of the Westies is a good name for this album. So good stuff.
All right, so we kind of already mentioned that from late 1970s onward, Elton John stopped being really relevant. He just settled into his status as a pop rock icon and basically just rode the coattails of his legacy for a while. But like I said, this episode is about those albums, that streak from 1970 to 75. Chris, what's your take on the big picture legacy of this period of Elton John?
Basically, Elton is one of the great hit makers in the history of pop music. The guy was, along with Taupin, those guys just wrote incredible songs and indelible ballads. I agree with you. I think he's the greatest power pop balladeer of all time. I think another big picture legacy of his is, along with Billy Joel, they proved that the piano could be a driver for rock songs. Like, you always had rock piano going back to Jerry Lee Lewis, obviously, but the piano is the backbone for a rousing, arena ready, lighting anthem. Really starts with Elton in 1970. And then Billy Joel joins that party a few years later. And so Elton really, I think that there's a sweep to his stuff. There's a symphonic, almost quasi-classical take on some of his instrumentation. See Your Song, see Tiny Dancer, right? Or like Leave On. And some of those other songs, Madman Across the Water is like that. He had a brilliant ear for pop hooks. He had a brilliant ear for melody. He was one hell of an arranger in terms of his ability to mix the piano with traditional rock instrumentation. and to add the strings, to add everything else. And he also, I think, his other big picture legacy was he's one of the foremost showmen.
Oh yeah,
he kind of took the Liberace flamboyance,
right,
and he mainstreamed that in rock and roll. That he predates Freddie Mercury. I think he's doing sort of a glam look, or he's doing sort of a kind of androgynous space alien kind of thing, even before David Bowie is doing it, and or as Bowie is starting to
at
do
the same
it.
time. At the same time,
Yeah, basically about the same time. And so with Elton's flamboyance, with his confidence, and with his competence as a writer, his ear for those hooks, his sense and his command of the grand. I don't think anybody had as much of a command of grandeur, of pop music grandeur, quite like Elton. And the only one that there's a few people that come close. There's Pete Townsend in his own way. There's Billy Joel, but really in terms of just a grand showman of basically getting an entire stadium of 100,000 people to sing along to your stuff.
Yeah,
Elton is that guy.
Right, totally.
In the big picture legacy, he's that guy more than anybody else in rock history. Right. He's that guy getting a stadium of 100,000 people in Wembley Stadium to sing along with his stuff. He made songs that were culturally important, that were big, that were events.
Right.
He was a songwriter of event songs.
Yeah.
And so with the personality, with the flamboyance, with the competence, with the musical chops, and then with Bernie Taupin as a secret weapon, that Elton's music brought in a lyricism that very few people had been able to touch. There's Dylan, obviously, and there's a few other folks like Lou Reed would be in that category. There's other lyricists, obviously that you could say might be a little bit better, but Bernie is on that level. And so for Bernie to be on that level as a lyricist, to have a musical talent like Elton John to give voice to those beautiful words, that's another thing too, is that it's true partnership songwriting and true collaborative songwriting. And that model, it really kind of starts with them, where one guy does the lyrics. And well, I mean, Robert Hunter is a contemporary. And, Robert Hunter wrote a lot of the lyrics for Jerry Garcia in The Dead. And so they kind of followed that model too. But Elton and Bernie kind of perfected that model of that clean divide of lyrics and music. And so that's another big picture legacy too, that there was that place for the designated lyricist, or the poet on, the poet on payroll, so to speak. So, so there's a lot of big picture stuff going on with Elton. But ultimately, to get back to it, he's the guy that could get 100,000 people in a stadium in London to sing his songs along with him, and he had that power to hold the audience in his hand like that. And he himself was an event, and his songs were events, and that's that. What do you say, Art?
Well, I mean, Queen would also, you could put Queen in that category too. Of that big stadium act, 100,000 people singing along to your songs. But Queen came a little after Elton John. So
yes, they did.
Yeah. Anyway, here are a few, like a handful, maybe a little more than that, of bands and artists who are clearly or not so clearly influenced deeply by Elton John. The first one is people listening are going to utter a big what the fuck. Guns N' Roses, especially. First of all, read old interviews with Axl Rose. The man gushes about his love of Elton John and how Elton John was his primary influence as a kid growing up in the 1970s listening to music. I think he said Elton John and Led Zeppelin were his formal, influences. You don't believe it? Go listen to the two discs of Use Your Illusion, 1 and 2, and focus on the ballads, particularly November Rain. That's basically an Elton John, Bernie Taupin song in anything but name.
Yep.
Especially its construction, its soaring anthemic chorus, the way it builds. And there are other songs on those two records that are very, estranged, yesterdays, a ballad, Axl Rose's ballads owe a lot to Elton John. Okay. Here's another one that's going to be a weird one. Mother Love Bone, otherwise known as the band that became Pearl Jam. Now you're all saying, what the fuck? No. Listen to Mother Love Bone's, again, they're ballads. Andy Wood was the lead singer of Mother Love Bone, died of a heroin overdose. It's what sparked the band to form Pearl Jam later on. Andy Wood's ballads, especially if you listen to the best song that band ever did, Chloe Dancer / Crown of Thorns. It's a medley. It's basically grungy Elton John. Yep. It really is. It has that spacey glam rock feel to it, but it has those little crunchy, grungy guitars that, make it sound like they're a band from Seattle. But like Mother Love, especially Andy Wood at his mellowest, very influenced by Elton John. Another Elton John influenced act, Ben Folds 5.
Yeah, I was just about to say Ben Folds 5. I was saving that for my own contribution.
Yeah. Basically punked up Elton. That's Ben Folds 5. The rockers sound like Elton John. The ballads sound like Elton John. Listen to Brick. Tell me that's not an Elton John influence.
Yeah, that's totally an Elton John song. And Give Me My Money Back, You Bitch
is also an Elton John influence song. Okay. Yep. Here's a weird one. My Morning Jacket.
Especially, I could see that.
Yeah, especially after they left their early country rock phase and they expanded their sound, especially starting with the 2005 album Z. From there onward, whenever My Morning Jacket went to ballad mode, it sounded like Elton John.
Yeah.
And that was a big one. Another obvious one, early Coldplay. Duh.
Yeah, duh. Yeah, big time.
Yeah. Keen. Duh.
Keen. Only Somewhere Only We Know, which is like one of the best songs ever. It's total Elton John.
Yeah. And another band, whenever they got down to their quasi-classical grandiosity and their balladness, Muse. Very influenced by you can hear the Elton influence in
I can see that.
Not when Muse were rocking out, but like when they mellowed out and they took the classical plus the pop hybrid that they were doing for their ballads. Very Eltonish, So those are some bands right there. So
I totally see it. And you stole my thunder because I was gonna chime in with Ben Folds, but Ben Folds, but you got them so. So there you go, and and I'm sure that there's other artists that we're forgetting it, but basically anybody that was like hair metal, like Bon Jovi.
Yeah, a lot of his
a big
God
influenced Elton John.
His mellower ballads, man. Even the Shot Down in a Blaze of Glory, Wanted Dead or Alive. Bed of Roses. I mean, come on.
Yeah,
you can hear Elton dripping from those songs.
But that's a lot of hair metal balladry. Is essentially Elton John in disguise. Like Warrant's Heaven is an Elton John song.
Heaven isn't too far away.
I mean, it's not a very good Elton John song, but it's still an Elton John song. We'll call that sea level Elton John, but it's still Elton John. So there's a lot of, and I'm sure that there's other artists that we can think of, but your list is pretty on point.
Yeah. All right. So Elton, we salute you. Your peak period is among the best of any band's or artist's peak period.
Yeah, absolutely. For those 6 years, to crank out the hits that he did, to come up with all those power ballads, the fact that he did your song, Burn Down the Mission, and Tiny Dancer in successive in less than 2 years, is kind of extraordinary.
Yeah,
I mean that's like another artist's whole career, and that's just like a less than 2 year sliver of a 40-year career.
Right.
So that's pretty astonishing. Yeah, he was pretty astonishing. And
he was.
And speaking of astonishing, folks, the Facebook community that we run called the Curmudgeonly Community on Facebook. We want you all to join us and to join in the merriment and mirth, and the stuff that Arturo shares up there is magnifique, and we get contribution from some pretty devoted followers on there, you know, and a lot of folks out there liking what we're doing. So thank you, folks, for contributing. And if you want to be part of the glory, go to facebook.com/groups/curmudgeon rock. The group is invite only, but unless you're a real cretin, chances are we'll let you in. Also, if you disagree with anything that we have to say, if you actually think Caribou is an awesome album, if you agree with Arturo that Captain Fantastic is not that great, feel free to say it. We'd like some fan mail. So curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. Hit us up there. And as always, we'll be making a Spotify playlist dedicated to this episode. Hell, I'm probably just going to take all 9 of these records that we talked to and just dump them in the playlist, and that'll be the playlist, and that'll be an accompaniment. You'll be able to access that link in the episode description field wherever you're accessing this podcast, whether it's on Apple or on Stitcher or on Amazon or anywhere else that you get your podcasts. So look for that link and bop along. And start with Crocodile Rock. Do me a favor. So with that, we bid you a farewell, and we'll talk to you in 2 weeks.